What's up, everyone, and welcome to Nervous Breakdowns with G, the 5th episode of my podcast. I am a nationally certified counselor. I have master's degrees in counseling and clinical psychology and over 10 years of clinical experience in the treatment of mental health. And what I do in my podcast is answer your questions about mental health, dating, personality, mental health related questions, basically, is what I'm getting at. And it's a milestone. It's my 5th podcast. I feel like I've accomplished something very special here, and I want to thank everybody that was responsible for this. I want to thank me. I did it. I was having a discussion with my wife, and you know how anniversaries have like a milestone, so like the 25th, I'm going to butcher this, but the 25th is like the gold, and then after that is the diamond. So I was like, well, what's the 5th of something? And of course, we Googled it, and it's wood. So she gave me a toothpick. I was very pleased with that. It was a nice reward for my hard work. And here we are. So, guys, please, if you have questions and you want to know something specific about mental health, you can always reach me at my Gmail account, breakdownswithg@gmail.com. Twitter is a great way to reach me, at breakdownswithg. I encourage you guys to follow my Tumblr page. My Tumblr feed is breakdownswithg.tumblr.com, and you can always download this podcast at iTunes. Please subscribe. Go to your iTunes page and subscribe to it. If you use the Stitcher Radio app, subscribe to it. And lastly, YouTube, Breakdowns with G, is my channel. Subscribe to that too. Subscribe all over, please, guys. Your views make me happy. So for today's episode, what we're talking about is anxiety. I have to say that among the questions that I've been getting, anxiety and how to relax have been routinely the most common questions. I've been getting them from people of all walks of life. I had one young lady who asked me, how can she manage her anxiety? She finds herself becoming overwhelmed by even small tasks around her home. How to make sure that she takes care of her paperwork, keeps clean. Sometimes she gets overwhelmed that she goes into panic mode and ends up having to take a pill, a prescription medication to help herself calm down. And she finds that she often deals with her anxiety in some unhealthy ways, like ignoring the problem, distracting herself with Facebook and other kinds of social media. So she wanted to know, what is this about? Where is this coming from? And I think that in order to have a discussion about anxiety, we have to first define what it is, and then we can talk about some really easy ways to, well, let me rephrase that, not easy ways, but really direct and simple ways to manage anxiety that require some practice and some hard work. So when we ask ourselves, what is anxiety? We've all felt it, right? You have a big test coming up. You're worried. You can't get it off your mind. Sometimes your heart may race, or you feel like you're short of breath because you're feeling so nervous about a problem. Sometimes anxiety can be fear, right? Like if we have a fear about dogs or other, getting on an elevator, we are very intimate with what anxiety is about. We feel it, and in fact, when we talk about anxiety, we have to be careful to be clear on the following point. Anxiety is good for us as long as it's in a healthy amount. If I get a bill in the mail and I'm not anxious about it, I really have no desire or no drive to pay for it. The thing that kind of gets us to do most of the things we have to do in life is this desire to avoid anxiety. So I go to work. I don't want to be late because I'm anxious about my boss giving me a hard time about being late. That bill comes in the mail. I really have a high motivation to pay it because I want my anxiety about the bill to go away. So anxiety is mainly a healthy, natural, normal human emotion that we're all supposed to have. Let's get that out of the way right now. In fact, for some people like me, I'm not anxious enough. I end up I do a lot of things at the last minute because my activation threshold for anxiety is so high that I don't feel motivated into action until, there's no way I can put it off any longer. I did this in school all the time. I would have papers to write. I can't tell you how many times I waited until the very last moment, the night before, to write a paper because I frankly wasn't that nervous about it. It also got me into trouble with some of my exams. I would think that I had it, so in the bag that I wouldn't study for the exam, and I did poorly on a few because of it. I really ended up having to recognize that tendency of mine and take steps to counteract it by basically forcing myself to study, even though I didn't feel like it. So when we talk about anxiety, I often am asked by my clients, what is this about? And the most simple way that I can describe anxiety is that it's a prehistoric reaction to modern problems. Now, what does that mean? We're sitting here, and most of you that are listening to this are listening to it on a computer or on a smartphone or some other device. We have laws and civilization. We're generally very safe. I mean, this point that we live in right now in human history is the time you're the least likely to be killed by another human being than any other point in human history, especially if you live in the United States. I mean, sure, murders happen, but murders were much more common 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago than they are now. Furthermore, the likelihood of us being attacked by a beast in the wild today is so small it's almost laughable. We've done a great job of killing off basically anything that would prey on us. Tigers are endangered. Wolves only exist in the United States, where we've reintroduced them. So we have very few opportunities in modern times to be faced with real life and death threats. This is a great thing. I'm not trying to say that like it's a bad thing. But our bodies, our physiology, and our reactions to things developed over thousands and thousands of years outside of modern civilization. In other words, think of the caveman version of yourself with a bad posture and a real big unibrow walking through the wilderness. The types of dangers that you're feeling or that you're facing living in the wilderness are not chronic dangers. They're immediate. In other words, I'm going to fall into this gap or this hole. This creature is going to eat me. Those types of things. And the way we respond to those things reflect that. So, you're walking along, caveman you are faced with a saber-toothed cat, and your body does things. First of all, you see it, you recognize danger, your blood pressure spikes through the roof, your heart rate goes through the roof, your respiration becomes shallow and very rapid, hyperoxygenating your blood. Your fingers and toes might go numb. This serves a dual purpose. A, you're not going to feel as much pain if you do get into a scrap with this beast. Secondly, the reason that's happening is because the blood is withdrawing from your extremities, your fingers and toes and arms and legs, and into your core. Again, two purposes for this. One, if you sustain an injury to one of your limbs during a fight with this beast, you're not going to bleed as much. And two, the blood is where it needs to be in your vital organs, to your heart to pump blood through your system as efficiently as possible, to your lungs to oxygenate the blood, to your brain so you can think clearly about this creature that you're facing. And so what you're having is a panic response to a dangerous situation for which there are only really two answers. You can either fight this thing that's facing you, or you can run away from it. Fight or flight, okay? And we've heard that term before, but it makes a lot of sense when you think of the context in which most of human history existed. Even in times where, medieval times, people still got killed by creatures in the wilderness. People also died in war. I mean, you're sitting in your farmland and Mongol raiders come along. The same fight or flight response is going to serve you well in that situation as well. Now, what it also does is it changes the way your brain works. And your brain stops functioning in the front of it, the forebrain, which is our most advanced, kind of higher thinking part of our brain, and goes into a very much like a reptile brain, where you're not thinking logically. You're thinking, I need to either get the hell out of here, or I need to claw this thing's eyes out. Again, very functional given the context under which it developed. Now, you take that same panic response, that same fight or flight response, and you apply it to today's problems, to a boss that's riding your ass, or to a job interview. And the same fight or flight response that does you so well in the nature situation actually hurts you. Okay? The types of problems that we face in modern society typically are not solved by running away, by fleeing, or by fighting it. In fact, the same change in our thinking patterns can hurt us. When we stop thinking clearly about a problem, when we start to think about it as a life or death situation, and you do, I mean, that's part of the panic response, is that you take this a normal everyday problem and you turn it into a life or death situation in your mind, it diminishes your ability to function properly in that situation. For example, you have a job interview. In your mind, you are terrified. You're afraid that you're going to fail at this thing. You're afraid that you're going to be judged poorly. And so what happens? You sit down in front of the interviewer and you lose your capacity to speak. You stumble, you stutter. I myself have anxiety when I sit down to do this podcast because I know I'm not a professional broadcaster. So I have to kind of check myself, get out of my own head, and just start recording and start doing it. And I think that as the podcast goes along, in other words, as the time progresses in each individual podcast, I feel more comfortable, my words come more clearly. Well, so we have an understanding that anxiety is detrimental to us in the sense that it actually hurts us. It stops us from being able to do the things that we need to do when we need to do them. So how do we combat this? How do we fight it? Well, there's a lot of different ways. One of the primary ways is people go to their doctor and they say, even their primary doctor, and say, hey, doc, I'm really having these panic problems. And the doctor gets on his little blue pad and he writes you a prescription for some Xanax or Klonopin or Ativan. Now, these medications are absolutely and 100% effective in controlling anxiety in the immediate sense. Think about it this way. When you take one of these medications, they're called benzodiazepines, benzos for short, but when you take one of these medications, it's as if you throw a wet blanket on your whole brain. The way they function is to diminish your brain's ability for the neurons to fire and kind of slow everything down. What you experience as you take the pill is a feeling of kind of calm or relaxation. And as I said, these pills are absolutely effective in the short term. Now, they have some downsides, okay? The first one is that they're habit forming. These medications, let me rephrase that. If you take the pill the way your doctor tells you to and you never abuse them, the likelihood of you developing an addiction is very small, all right? But they're habit forming in the following respect. A, you start to rely on this medication for when you feel anxious. B, most medications have a withdrawal effect. Now, I don't mean in the sense that you become hooked on it and then you have to detox and withdraw off them. But for every medication, they have a refractory effect that's the opposite of the therapeutic effect. Let me explain. If you take a medication that makes you calm, for the amount of time that medication's in your system, the medication is making you feel relaxed. But as it comes out of your system, you start to feel more and more anxious, and you will actually pass your baseline. You're actually going to go beyond where you started, and for a short time be more anxious than you were before. And what we find is, through research, that people who take medications like Xanax and Klonopin are actually more sensitive to anxiety than people who have never taken them. In fact, there are certain medications that if you've taken Xanax or Klonopin, certain of the more mild medications, you cannot feel them. There's a medication called Buspar, which is an old drug that they used to use to treat anxiety. It's very mild, but if you've taken a Xanax or a Klonopin, Buspar doesn't work for you. Okay, so the medications, while helpful, I think represent only a part of the solution. Absolutely, if you have anxiety that gets to the point where it locks you up and you can't do the things that you need to do, talk to your doctor, go see a professional, take the medications. But I encourage you to think of these medications as the short-term solution. Many psychiatrists will do this. They'll start you on this short-acting medication like Xanax for a month, okay? And while they're starting on the Xanax, they're going to introduce a medication called an SSRI. That's a medication that is longer acting, and has a different mechanism. I don't want to get into it. I don't want to go too far into the weeds with this, but essentially they'll taper you off the Xanax and taper you onto this other more long-acting medication. But like I said, medications have their pros and cons. There's no free rides when it comes to mental health treatment. So, see your doctor, ask the questions if you have them. But there's another way to treat anxiety that addresses both the physiological part of the anxiety and the kind of the cognitive part, the part that where we tell ourselves that we're having a problem that's much bigger than what it is. The first thing we need to do is to recognize that when we're anxious, our ability to think clearly is diminished, which I already described. And therefore, when we try to think ourselves through our problems while we're anxious, we fail. We have a hard time because our brains don't have the ability to process information properly. So the first line of defense when it comes to anxiety is to chill out our bodies, to take that kind of, oh my God, I'm being attacked by a gorilla body reaction and mellow it out so that we feel more like our normal selves. And the way we do this is through the relaxation techniques. This is an important note about the relaxation techniques. In my clinical practice, when I talk to my clients and I advise them, I teach them these relaxation techniques, and in the office they work great. The people report feeling more relaxed, less anxious, and kind of a general sense of increased calm. This is a technique, and just like any other technique, the more you practice at it, the better you get. If you were playing basketball and you were learning how to shoot a basket and score points, you wouldn't want to just try it once and then the next time you're trying it, you're in the big game, right? In the championship game, you're definitely not going to be very good at shooting the basket if you've only done it once before. And the same thing is true of this technique. When you learn how to do a breathing technique, you have to practice it every day. That way, when you need it, when the big game comes and you're about to score the game-winning point, you don't have to think about the ins and outs of how you're doing this. It becomes natural, and you can just employ it and focus on the way your body feels and not so much on the mechanics of doing this breathing technique. Also, by doing a little bit of relaxation every day, you're going to reduce your overall level of anxiety. See, the problem is that when we're anxious, we tend to walk around and not really be aware of how anxious we are. Have you ever been watching a movie that's pretty exciting, and as you're watching it, the big crisis ends and you realize that your body has been tensed up and you kind of you've been holding your breath? People that are anxious experience this every day. They're walking around and they're on a scale of 1 to 10, their baseline of anxiety is like a 4. Your blood pressure is a little high, you're breathing shallow, you're hyperventilating all the time, and you're just kind of always on the edge of your seat. When this happens, if 10 is like panic time, and you're starting out as a 4, it doesn't take much to kick you into panic. So what we need to do is to start to reduce your baseline of anxiety by doing this breathing technique. It's very simple. In fact, part of what I'm going to do today is teach you a simple biofeedback technique and, do the thing where you pause this tape and try it out as you go along. But hold out your weak hand. So for me, it's my left hand. Hold it out in front of you as if you're karate chopping something. So it's perpendicular to the ground, your thumb's up in the air. And hold your thumb straight up and trace a line down from your thumb to your wrist bone. And you should feel kind of on the top, but a little bit on the inside, like a spongy area. And using your dominant hand, the index and middle fingers, touch that and see if you can feel your pulse. Okay? You don't want to use your thumb because the thumb has its own pulse. It kind of, you'll feel something that's not really what you're looking for. Now try to get that pulse, and for about 15 seconds, feel it. Count the number of times the pulse goes for 15 seconds, multiply that by 4, and you have your heart rate, your heartbeats per minute. Healthy heart rate is somewhere between like 60 and 80. If you're anxious, it's going to be higher. Now, I want you to sit in your seat and dim the lights, put on, be relaxed, try to avoid any distractions. And we're going to do a simple breathing technique. In this breathing technique, all you're going to do is breathe in through your nose until for a count of 4. So you go in, 2, 3, 4. And then without holding it, very smoothly, release it for 6. The idea is you're going to take a breath in that's sharpish, 1, 2, 3, 4. and then out for as long as you can let it out without getting lightheaded or anything like that. And do that 10 times. Throughout this process, as you go through it, you may want to focus on breathing through your diaphragm. In other words, not breathing from your chest, but through your belly, and you can Google how to do that. But the idea is you're going to be counting just 10 times, in 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? So pause this tape, do it now. And then when you're done, I want you to come back and take your pulse again. And I can guarantee you that if you've done this right, your heart rate will be down anywhere between 5 and 10 beats per minute. If you could take your blood pressure, that would be down too. And you're generally going to have a sense of kind of relaxation. If you do this every day, you're going to find that you're going to become very good at it. That you're going to have a response in less time. So you're going to be able to do it instead of 10 times, 5 times, get the same response. And this is the very same technique that people use to do really amazing things like free diving. Free diving is it's a form of sport where people go without an air tank very deep in the water and can hold their breath. I mean, I think the world record is something like 20 minutes. This guy's holding his breath, and he does it by manipulating the way he breathes. I don't think he uses this technique. This is a very basic one, but and you know, I'm just trying to demonstrate that with practice, people can absolutely manage their physiology. The other benefit of this is if you feel yourself becoming anxious and you do the breathing technique, you're going to maintain your higher brain function, the more logical part of your brain, instead of that kind of caveman unibrow part that just wants to smash things and run away, okay? So practice that, get good at it, you'll be able to employ it when you need it. Now here's the other part, and this is if you really struggle with anxiety, if it's something where it gets to a clinical level and you need to talk to somebody, absolutely. I'm going to give this kind of disclaimer in basically every episode. Go see somebody. Everybody's personal anxiety is different. The cognitions, the thoughts that you have vary. So I'm just going to give some examples today. But if you have insurance, call your insurance company and see who accepts it and go see a counselor. If you don't have insurance, you can go to samhsa.gov, SAMHSA.gov. It's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And right on their front page, they have a link that you can follow to get to a provider in your area. Go see somebody, please. It's a little hard if you don't have insurance. Sometimes there's long waits for service, but it's worth it. I know here in New Jersey, there have been a lot of movements lately to try to get access more quickly, including where I work. What we do is we do a lot of business with emergency rooms, and we see a lot of people that come in with anxiety disorders because people that have panic attacks will check themselves into ER. So we see a lot of it. All right, now that said, now that the disclaimer is out of the way, what we find is that people who get anxious about a lot of things tend to do one of a few, basically, thought errors. When I say a thought error, what we're talking about is a distortion or a cognitive problem that you have where you think about something inappropriately. Let's give an example. Let's say I'm going for a job interview and I'm anxious about it and I'm having a freak out. And what I'm doing is I'm thinking about this job interview and I'm telling myself how important it is. Oh my God, I really have to make sure I get this job. If I don't, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have my bills to pay. Oh man, if I don't pay these bills, I'm going to end up losing my phone. How will I get a job then if I have no phone? If I can't get a job, I'm not going to be able to pay for a place to stay. I'm going to end up on the street. Oh my God. Stop it. Okay? What you're doing there is something called catastrophizing or awfulizing. And you've taken a series of possibilities, and at each fork in the road, you've assumed that the worst possible thing is going to happen. You've turned this job interview into living in a cardboard box in the street. And yeah, if when faced with living in a cardboard box in the street, you're going to feel anxious. But that's not what this is. This is a job interview. At the end of the job interview, you'll either have a job or you won't. And that's all you can say about it. That's the only thing you know for sure about this thing that you're about to face. Once you tell yourself that, as opposed to that kind of, bouncing from one worst thing to the next worst thing until you're in this kind of a fantasy scenario where doomsday has occurred, if you can keep with the more rational thought, it's really easy to avoid getting locked up with anxiety. In fact, you'll perform better in the interview if you're not that anxious about it. You say, well, I'm going to do my best in this interview. I'll either get the job or I won't. And beyond that, I don't know. Okay? That's the most rational thought you can have about the situation. Another cognitive error what we do is something called overestimation of risk. I saw a client for a while who was involved. She was traumatized. She was involved in a store robbery. In the store robbery, she wasn't actually injured, but she saw a guy come in and rob a store. He was waving a gun around. And from that point on, she refused to go into stores anymore. And when asked why? Because it could get robbed. And that's absolutely true. You go in a store and it could get robbed. That's a fact. But what she was doing was assuming it would get robbed and assuming that the risk of it getting robbed was far more than what it was. When I've talked to this woman, she had been in the store millions of times. And this was a middle-aged woman. She, took care of herself. She went to stores constantly, bought groceries, bought clothes, this and that. And what she did was she took something that was possible, that a store could get robbed, and made it probable. In fact, the fact that she had been robbed in a store in her neighborhood basically, statistically, prevents her from being robbed again. It'd be like getting struck by lightning twice. And we would work on this. We would start to think about, well, how likely is this to happen? Are you afraid of a real thing, or are you really just grappling with the fear of this thing that happened to you? And over time, she was able to admit, no, you're right. This is something where it's not likely to happen. I don't live in a bad neighborhood. I don't live in a place where stores get robbed all the time. This was a fluke and very unlikely to happen again. Is it possible? Sure. It's also possible that as I'm taping this right now, an airplane could crash through my house. But that's not something I spend a lot of time thinking about because it's so unlikely as to basically be impossible. There are lots of other cognitive distortions that we make. There's selective abstraction, where you only look at the types of evidence that support a thought that you're already having. A lot of people that are afraid of animals do this. If I'm afraid of dogs, I tell myself dogs bite. And it's true, some dogs do. But if all dogs bit, they wouldn't be very good pets. We wouldn't keep them, right? But I will only pay attention to times when on the news, oh, yeah, well, there was a dog biting on the news the other day. And I know a guy down the street who had a problem with a dog when he was a kid. So what you're doing is you're basically filtering the information that you're allowing into your thoughts so that they only support the idea that you already have. Again, these are cognitive problems that become worse when we're in panic mode, when we're having the physiological reaction to something that we're already kind of terrified about. And it takes work. But with work, you can manage these feelings. The anxiety is a problem that's very common and very, very treatable, responds very well. So in response to the question posed to me by a lot of my listeners, how do you relax when you're anxious? The key is practice. Start to do the breathing techniques, the relaxation techniques, and listen, go online and find one that you like. The one I described is not the only one. It's not even the most effective one. If you can do some yoga on a day-to-day basis and learn how to manage your breathing that way. Yoga is really good because it manages your breathing and kind of your muscle tension that you have. They also have a relaxation technique called progressive muscle relaxation. Is that it? PMR. Yeah, I think that was the name of it. But the idea is, starting with your toes, you tense as hard as you can and release each muscle group, progressing up until you get to the top of your head. So squeeze your toes really hard as you can for a second, let it go, squeeze them again, let it go. And throughout the process, you're noticing the difference between your tense normal state and your relaxed state, and you're retraining your body how to be relaxed. Again, pick the one that you like the best, pick the one that seems like you could do it when you need to. And you can absolutely have a lot of success managing the physiological parts of your anxiety. But the cognitive part tends to be the more troublesome one, because you really need somebody to talk to point out the times when you're making these errors. A lot of times we convince ourselves through repetition over and over again telling ourselves something about the world that may or may not be true, and it becomes impossible to know when we're doing it. So going to see a counselor goes a long way in terms of having just somebody to bounce these ideas off of and to point out and maybe challenge you a little bit and say, well, you're saying this, you're saying that if you don't get that job interview, you're going to end up homeless. But is that really true? I mean, what does it really mean not to get a job? And through that process, you can develop a more accurate idea about the way the world is and hopefully reduce your anxiety. So I hope that answers the question. It's a complex one, and it's one that people really struggle with. I know that anxiety can run the gamut from kind of, being anxious at speaking in public, which for most people, if you don't have a public speaking job, won't have that much impact on you, to some people who really truly are anxious about all things all the time, become obsessive about things, can't leave their homes, and there's a time when it becomes to a clinical level where you absolutely need to get some help. Now, one of the things that the main person who's asking me this question mentioned was that she really feels embarrassed about the fact that she has to take a medication because she feels like it makes her weak. And this is something I grapple with as a mental health practitioner as well. I see clients all the time who really struggle with very difficult things in their lives. And they're depressed and they're anxious and they have situations in their lives that are very difficult, deaths in their family, trauma, abuse, you name it. And it's kind of a prevailing idea that if you have to get mental health help, that you're weak somehow, that there's some kind of a flaw in your character, and that you should just be able to do it on your own. And that's usually the first step that I have to grapple with, or the first thing I have to tackle when I see a new patient is that, how does that figure? You're getting some treatment for a problem that you're having. Where does your character enter into it? And that's the one thing I would tell somebody if they're feeling embarrassed about getting mental health treatment is we all struggle with things. Some people have medical issues related to their blood sugar or their blood pressure, and they take medications for those things, and the idea of their character never enters into their mind. And I see this as being very similar. We're responding to some of the life experiences that we've had and trying to make ourselves better and to feel better. So thank you guys for listening. I hope this was helpful. If it was helpful, I really hope that you share this with a friend. I don't make any money off this podcast and I don't advertise it, but I really do like to see when my downloads go up. So when I see a lot of numbers for my downloads, it makes me happy and it makes me motivated to keep doing these things. And the only way that's going to happen is if you tell your friends. So if you listen to this and you liked it, hell, even if you didn't like it, if you hate it and you think it's the worst thing in the world, lie to your friends, tell them you liked it and make them listen to it. And if you do that, I will be thrilled. If you have some questions, if you have questions about either any of the topics we talked about today or in my other podcast or even a new thing that you're just curious about, send them to me. I'm eager to respond to any questions you have. You can get it. I gave my information at the beginning, but I'll repeat it now. You can either tweet it to me at breakdownswithg. You can email me, breakdownswithg@gmail.com. And subscribe to me. Subscribe to me on Tumblr, breakdownswithg.tumblr.com, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. Help me get these download numbers up, guys. I really appreciate it. And thanks. Thanks for listening.